Wife's karma is real after she cheated on my boss. Dan Sanders, you're under arrest. The charge is first-degree murder, the detective told me. All I could do was sit there and stare at him. Then he walked to the door and opened it. Several very large men came in and led me away. My almost perfect, happy life had just crumbled before my eyes. The cell I was placed in was cold. There was a cot and a toilet. That was all. I sat down gingerly on the bunk, the bullet hole in my left shoulder hurting like hell, my bandaged arm dangling uselessly. Then I thought of Melody. The last time I saw her, she was standing there with an expression of shock and horror on her face. "If only I'd locked the door when I got home," I said to the policeman, sobbing. But it probably wouldn't have made any difference. One of us would have answered if those two men had just rang the doorbell, I added. They all looked at me, and I decided to shut up. I told them that I had just pressed the button to turn on the TV as the door opened. Turning around and noticing the gun, I immediately knew things were not right. An instinct from my military training kicked in, and I lunged right at them. I didn't make it. On TV, when a hero gets shot in the shoulder, he gets up, grabs it, groans, and then keeps fighting. In real life, you fall. For a moment, I froze in shock. Then something slammed over my face. I saw Melody, and I'll never forget the look on her face. When I came to my senses, I saw her lying on the floor. Her face was covered in blood, and I realized she was dead. I tried to crawl over to her as suddenly there were men around who began to restrain me. They handcuffed me. God, that hurt. "It doesn't look good," the lawyer told me, shaking his head a few days later. "I didn't do it. There were two men there." I started to protest. "I believe you, but the police have tied things up pretty tight so far. Your wife was shot at point-blank range. They say you shot yourself and then used chloroform to kill yourself. The call to the police was made from your cell phone. It only had your DNA on it. Same with the gun, it had your DNA on it, and they found it next to you. Strangely, the latex gloves were found partially burned in the wood stove, like you tried to get rid of them, but the fire went out. We didn't even have latex gloves. These guys must have." I know. We need to check some things out. Some things are not true here." The man waved his hand. "The evidence is piling up. Some for, others against. My DNA was on a small .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol bought with my credit card and ID. But I told them I didn't buy any gun, and that was true. The bullet they recovered from Melody matched the bullet they recovered from my shoulder. They claimed that I shot Melody and then myself to make it look like a home invasion. They claimed I threw my gloves into the fireplace, called an anonymous tip about the shots, and then gassed myself. But the small, freestanding wood stove was failing. I knew the metal chimney was partially clogged, and I planned to tear it down that very weekend. A few pieces of gloves survived when the fire went out, which it should have done if all the drafts hadn't been left open. Besides, they were the kind that are powdered on the inside, and such powder apparently doesn't burn well. There were remains from 3 of them, but what's left of the 4th? Plus the DNA on the gun, but they claimed I was wearing gloves? Enough to raise doubts, and my lawyer used that to get me out on bail. The house was posted as bail, and I was allowed to go home. The prosecutor's claims that I was a slick killer went unheeded. The judge didn't buy it. After all, why try to burn the gloves? Logic dictated that I just left them somewhere to be found, because if the fire hadn't gone out, there would have been no evidence left of them at all. My lawyer had spoken very well, and I was grateful to him for that. When I got home, I looked at the dark mess on the carpet and the mess left in the house after the search. I spent the night in the garage where I had a small side room with a single bed that we used for occasional guests. The next day, I hired a crew to clean up and replace the carpets. "I still think you did it, but we're dropping the charges," they told me a few months later. Too many things didn't add up, most notably those gloves. If I had cleaned the stovepipe the week before, as Melody had asked, there was a good chance I'd still be in a jail cell. But I didn't, and I didn't do it on purpose. Then there was the small firearm. Why put on gloves when it turned out I'd bought it a couple weeks earlier, registering it to my address? Wore gloves, but my DNA was left on the gun, and I didn't bother to wipe it clean? Then how did I manage to shoot myself in the shoulder but leave no powder burns? Why call the police from my own cell phone found in my shirt pocket? Yes, easily enough to raise reasonable doubt. And then there were the fingerprints, the one they take when you show ID to buy a gun. It wasn't mine. The other thing that closed the case was the deposit bag. On Fridays, I would take home all my cash proceeds and put them in a safe that I kept there to deposit on Monday on my way to the store. This amounted to about $10,000 in weekly sales over the counter. My boss gave cash discounts to avoid credit fees, and he wouldn't take a check at all. I tried several times to convince him to do overnight deposits, but he didn't want to hear about it since some cashier had scammed him once a few years before. The whole thing was a pain in the VJTVNKAT. But Ben was the boss, so I did whatever he asked. For some reason, he trusted me because I knew all about his accounting methods and was sure he had no clue about anything. Part of that trust had to do with the fact that I had changed the bookkeeping so it could be tracked, but of course I had complete control over that as well. That night, a bag of deposits disappeared. They checked my own accounts, other purchases, but found nothing. They even checked the ledgers, much to the boss's displeasure, but of course they checked everything there too. Paper trails are hard to follow when they're not there. It had to be an inside job, a setup, since the gun was bought in my name. All of Ben's poor employees were practically strip-searched. Nothing. I was waiting for them to come up with the fact that Ben had sex with my wife, but they never did. Too convoluted a deal for a measly 10 grand, but you're free to go. The detective growled at me. I realized he thought he knew, but couldn't bring it out. They say the husband is the last to know, but that's not always true. At least not in my case. Melody and I met at a party. We were introduced by a couple who more or less set things up so that we would meet. They knew Melody, knew me, and decided we were perfect for each other. They were almost right. We got along great that night. That led to dating, and less than a month later we were exclusive. Sex progressed in the usual way, and by the 4th date we were having it quite often. "How about we stay the night?" whispered Melody in my ear. At the same time, I ran my hand down her blouse, my fingertips making their way to her bra while she stroked my body. It was a wonderful time. Melody wasn't shy at all and put on a little show for me in my bedroom. She never left my house after that, except to pack her things. Marriage, 4 long, happy years. My job paid pretty well, so we were well off. I ran the warehouse, kept track of stock and supplies. The only thing that was bad was the monthly deliveries to one customer that required an overnight trip. I wanted to just ship the goods, but the boss had a truck and I was getting a paycheck, so he decided it would be cheaper to just send me. "I can pay you a few bucks extra and get you a room, and then you won't have to wait to come back," he told me. I calculated that with fuel and everything else, the difference wasn't that much, but he didn't argue the point. His name was Ben Harrington, a tall, good-looking fellow, not quite 40, with a curly mop of blonde hair. It seemed that some girls showed up in his office regularly, like clockwork, and always a blonde. Melody had stopped by the warehouse once, the one time she'd met Ben. She looked good, but Melody always looked good. "Yum, yum," he said to her with a smirk as they shook hands. Melody's face flushed with pleasure, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Later, when she left, he poked me in the arm. "You lucky asshole," he grinned. Only a couple weeks went by, and Ben asked me to make my first delivery. It was a Tuesday. I whined and complained, but Ben was adamant. I finally gave up, called Melody, and told her what was up. I explained that I would stay the night in Seattle and return to the warehouse the next morning. "It'll only be once or twice a month, and I think I'll be working, so there'll be more money too." "Okay, honey, I'll be all right. Then when you get home on Wednesday, I'll make a nice dinner." "Okay," said I. "And then you can have sex with me if you really want to." Melody could turn me on right over the phone when she started doing it. Over the next year, it became a ritual. Once or twice a month, I'd make my way to Seattle, drop off the goods, and then spend the night at the Four Corners Motel. The place was a bit run down, but it also only cost $45 a night. Ben wouldn't pay for something fancy. I considered just taking the long way back. By the time I unloaded, did the paperwork, grabbed a bite to eat, and set off on the long journey, it was early morning. The clerks were almost expecting me and calling my name. The one named Jerry told me he had some phone numbers if I needed company, but I declined. More than once, as I walked to my room, some woman would open the door and smile, and one even opened her blouse to show me her breasts. Like I said, it was a divey place. The female clerk who worked there I saw from time to time. She was barely in her 20s or so, and was just a stone fox. She was a long-haired blonde, tall and slender because of her bike riding, which I always saw chained outside. Her name was Candy, which seemed over the top to me until she explained that her parents had named her Candace. One day after I checked in, she leaned over to me and asked if I wanted to keep her company later. She didn't act like a call girl. I guess I showed surprise. "Hey, I'm not for sale, honey. It's just that you're cute, and I could use some fun. I like you, but I can't. I'm married." I raised my right hand to show the gold wedding band I never took off. "Danny, you're here, and she's there, and I won't tell." Candy giggled. "I'm sorry. I just can't," I told her. There was no way in hell I would cheat on Melody. Marriage involved vows, and that was very important to me. My father had been caught cheating, and I ended up growing up with just my mom, and I resented him for it. That will never happen to me, that's for sure. I just couldn't touch another woman. Not like that. I also knew that Melody was completely faithful. Sure, I knew she wasn't a virgin when we met, and neither was I. But she had told me about her experience, about how it hadn't been very pleasurable when she was fresh out of high school. I told her about my experiences too. There were only two, and both times were not what you would call right. Melody and I had always been completely open and honest with each other, and that was something I treasured. Our relationship was pure, priceless. I was proud of my beautiful wife. I was driving on the freeway 30 miles north of Portland when a strange sensation arose in the car. The normal hum of the big diesel engine got louder, and then I saw a red light on the dashboard come on. I pulled to the side of the highway and stopped. I tried several times to start the engine, but it only made a muffled clicking sound. Using my cell phone, I called for help. Then I called home to tell Melody what was going on. I called 10 times, and there was no answer. I called again, thinking I must have missed a dial, but the call repeated 10 more times. Weird, thought I as the big tow truck pulled up. Normally, there was no need to call home during overnight trips. It was just a move and then return the next day, and it didn't make any sense. Nevertheless, I expected her to be home. I decided I would probably buy her a cell phone, even though she said she didn't like them. I towed the truck to the repair shop, went downstairs, rented another truck, and moved all the boxes into the rented one. I called the house a few more times, but there was no answer. Then I tried calling Ben, but no one there or at the warehouse answered as it was getting late. By 1 a.m., I gave up and went to bed. Where was she? From time to time, she went to visit her girlfriends, but she never left the house later than 1 o'clock in the morning. She couldn't drink because she didn't drink at all. I was suddenly overcome with a dreary feeling. The next day, I delivered the cardboard boxes, went back and rented them. I rented a car and headed home. I was frustrated, so I didn't try to call. Ben was at the warehouse. I explained to him what had happened, and he got to work arranging to have the truck repaired. He wasn't happy. The big Cummins diesel engine cost over $20,000. In the evening at home, Melody seemed perfectly normal. As usual, she made a lovely dinner, and later, as usual, she began to show every sign of wanting to make love. For a while, Melody made me forget about my suspicions. I wanted to ask her where she had been the night before, but I didn't. A couple weeks later, Ben came over and asked me to go to Seattle on Tuesday, and I nodded. Later, he told me and left. I watched his bright red Corvette pull out of the parking lot, then picked up the phone and called the client in Seattle. No problem. We have a couple weeks to spare, so that's fine, they told me when I asked if we could delay the shipment. I drove home, parking far down the street. Barely had I reached the driveway when Melody came out of the house, got into her little silver Honda, and drove off. Soft beige blouse, very short dark skirt, 3-inch heels. She certainly wasn't going to Safeway. I followed her and she drove about 2 miles out of town and turned into a park. I stopped and watched, for there was only one entrance and exit to this small park. A few minutes later, I was shocked to see Ben's bright red Corvette pull out of the park, make a short flash, and drive off down the street. Melody sat in the passenger seat. 6 miles later, they pulled up to the Lakeshore Motel. I watched him walk over and open the door for my wife, who hugged him as soon as she got out of the car. Ben's hands went down and lifted her cheeks so high that for a moment I could see her light blue panties. They were the silk ones I had bought her as a gift. My whole body became as cold as ice. "That cheating bitch!" I screamed to myself. I got in my car and drove back to the store. My hands clutching the steering wheel turned white. "Cheating!" I yelled the whole way. At that moment, if my boss had been around, something bad would have happened. I was close to going back and kicking the door in. Then I felt a strange calmness come over me. The mad rage turned to stone-cold determination. I knew what I was going to do. No one could do this to me and get away with it. Back in Seattle, I made the delivery. "I thought you couldn't make it this time," the man on the loading dock said to me. "It worked out, and we're back on schedule," said I. Back at the motel, Candy was working. "Hi, Danny," she smiled. Hi, are you still ready to pay me a visit?" I asked her. It wasn't planned. It just happened. "I thought you said you were married." "Yes," I told her. "I get off at midnight." Candy grinned. It would be nice to say it was wonderful, but even though Candy was beautiful and sexy, I had a hard time getting her to have sex with me. But she agreed. It was all strange, unfamiliar. Candy was soft with me, not like Melody. For me, sex with the woman I love is magic, and sex with just a body is like horror. It was clear to me that I hadn't made much of an impression on Candy. She left around 2 in the morning. "Thank you." That was all she said to me. I lay there thinking, knowing that at this very moment my wonderful wife was probably cheating on me with my boss, Ben. Stupid overnight trips to get me out of the way so he can take what's mine? I'll make them pay for it. It took me a little over a month to find enough money. All I did was shuffle the inventory numbers. All those cash sales were easy to hide. Make a sale, get rid of the store copy, count it at the end of the day, and pocket the difference. Ben had no idea how much product we had on hand, of that I was quite sure. The man I found in a rather poor section of town looked enough like me to pass me by at a glance, and with a haircut like mine, he did. He didn't ask what I needed the gun for, and I didn't bother to tell him. "Get as far away from here as you can," I told him, holding out a bag containing $5,000. 4 weeks later, I walked into my house. "Honey, I'm home," I exclaimed. Melody walked into the living room and saw me standing in 2 pairs of latex gloves with a small gun in my hand. The look of shock and surprise on her face will stay with me forever. "Honey, what?" "Oh, God, no," was all she managed to say. I pointed the gun and shot her between the eyes at almost point-blank range. Quickly stepping out into the garage, I clamped the butt of the gun between 2 pieces of rubber in a vise, positioned myself where I had carefully planned, and jabbed the trigger with the pool cue. What should have been a wound knocked me to the ground. The bullet hit bone right in my shoulder, and I fell. A few seconds passed. I got to my feet, knowing I didn't have much time. I didn't even have to deal with the board I had set up to stop the bullet. It didn't go all the way through. Looking down, I saw that there wasn't much blood at all. I made sure there wasn't any on the floor. It hurt a lot, but I managed to get back into the house. I looked at Melody lying there, and for a moment, I almost regretted what I had just done. Almost. Then I thought about the fact that she was cheating on me with my boss, and I had to struggle a bit to get myself under control again. I lit the fire I'd laid out that morning, waited for it to flare up, and then extinguished it. Taking off the top set of gloves, I tossed them onto the rapidly dying embers and pushed the second set farther away. Those flared up, and I quickly closed the door and turned off the humidifiers. The fire was out in just a few seconds. I threw the gun on the floor and lay down. Dialing 911, I spoke quickly through clenched teeth, holding my tongue between my teeth. I pressed the button, disconnecting the phone, and slipped it into my shirt pocket. Reaching for the prepared rag, I took a few deep breaths, expecting to pass out, but it only made me dizzy. No matter, I could fake it. It was a year later when I went to a small park and dug out a bag of overnight donations. I stuffed the money in my pocket and reburied the bag. The hole was deep, and I carefully placed sod over the dirt. Back at work, I continued to accumulate money. Every few weeks, I would go downstairs and buy a few gold coins through the cash register. Ben didn't say much when I returned to work, only apologized for putting us at such risk. Then he went on to talk about how Melody was such a beautiful woman, that it was so tragic. But he didn't care about regrets, because the next thing he cared about was whether his insurance would cover the robbery. He was very angry when he found out it wouldn't cover it, something about having to make nightly deposits. Then he decided to use a transportation company, so the overnight moves to Seattle stopped too. This was just as well. I had to drive with my hand on the wheel, but my shoulder never healed properly, and now I couldn't lift my arm above my waist. Funny thing is, since I was carrying an overnight travel bag, it had to do with my job. I'll be damned if I don't get compensated for my work. I laughed so hard I almost choked when I found out about it. There was a lot of buzz in the papers when, a year and a half later, Ben walked out of the Lakeshore Motel and started up his bright red Corvette. The explosion was spectacular. The blonde woman who was with him didn't survive either. Her husband was questioned very thoroughly, but he didn't understand a thing. I didn't know, but I didn't feel too bad. Just another cheating fool. The other surprise was Ben's will. It was typed and looked very professionally done. It had even been notarized, which was easy to do by handing him a stack of documents that he paid little or no attention to. Away with the notary, for 25,000 gold coins, you could do almost anything. The woman probably figured that, since Ben was only 30, it would be about 50 years before the issue came up. And when the incident occurred, what was she going to do? Tell anyone? Ben Harrington had no wife or children, just a brother who often lost his temper. But there was nothing he could do about it. He took Ben's house and what was left of his bank account. For some reason, his business wasn't doing too well, so there wasn't much money in the bank. The same Detective Watson dragged me there and questioned me thoroughly, but at the time I was almost 150 miles away in a motel room with a woman named Candy. Maybe it was done with a timer or something? Who knows? There was nothing left there. I just shrugged my shoulders. Yeah, in that respect, things got better with Candy when we had a rerun, and I went to see her every couple weeks to say hello. I knew it would come in handy. She wouldn't mind if I told them I was there. Why do I get the feeling you're somehow involved in this whole thing, Sanders? She looked me straight in the eye. I just shrugged. Life can get pretty good if a person works hard and does their best. My business was doing well, and I was just doing the bookkeeping and keeping track of everything. Credit cards helped a lot with sales, and once I went online, things took off. We didn't have to pass anything up. We were generating income. Sometimes I still pocketed a few $100 to keep from going crazy. Old habits are hard to break. A pretty blonde secretary named Sandra knew her job well, and it took her about 60 seconds during the interview to figure out what I needed and offer it. Probably because my gaze kept falling on her cleavage every now and then she would lean forward to get a better view and tell me she would do her best to make me happy. Maybe if we close the door, you'd like to demonstrate your skills, I asked. She stood up, walked to the door, and clicked the lock. Then she turned to me with a smile and undid the last 4 buttons on her blouse. Her bra fell to the floor as she crossed the room. Judging by her impressive breasts, she didn't need it. Soon we were having sex. That was fine with me, as I wasn't planning on getting married again, that's for sure. Another cheating wife would be too much for me to handle. Not caring about my wife, I even took advantage of a couple of girls from my delivery department. Brenda was a brunette, a little heavyset, which nicely distinguished her from the slender blonde Sandra. The other was named Kim, and her oriental features were interesting too. She was sitting under my desk one day when Sandra knocked, and I told her to come in. Of course, Sandra knew Kim was there since she went in and never came out again, but she just smirked while I checked and signed some forms. Then Mrs. Pointer, she made some suggestions and didn't seem happy when I turned her down. Mrs. Pointer, of course, was married, which meant she had no right to be married. Even at 45, she looked very good, and I confess I thought about it, but I wouldn't have done it for anything in the world. I also gave her a raise of a few bucks to keep the employees happy. One day, when a few years had passed and things had calmed down, I went out and bought myself a new bright red Corvette. I wrote a personal check and felt good that I was able to do that. Yes, life was good. I had no idea how things would turn out. The only thing that was bad was my bloody arm, but still a good price to pay for getting rid of a cheating wife and being well rewarded for it. One day, while working on my bills, I made a mistake of $2.11, and it pissed me off. "Detective Watson to see you, Mr. Sanders," said Sandra to me over the intercom. So what did that asshole want? I thought. Okay, send him in. "Hello, Sanders." The man didn't offer me a handshake, just sat down. "What can I do for you?" I asked, still thinking about my books. "Well, a couple questions came up." Now he was smirking. "Like what?" I really didn't feel like talking to this asshole. "Well, the fingerprints. Apparently some street bum was breaking into stores in Medford, got caught, and guess what? They matched the prints of the guy who bought your gun." "Oh, you mean you caught the killer?" A sweat broke out almost instantly. "Yes. Of course we caught him. As soon as we told him he was going down for his first murder, he started singing like a rooster in the morning sun." I just stared at him. "He even memorized your name, because he had to sign it to get you the gun." A huge grin appeared on Detective Watson's face. "Stand up, Sanders. You're under arrest on a charge of premeditated murder." He pulled out a set of handcuffs. With no point in resisting, I stood up. "Gotcha!" The man smirked. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.